Vampire King caught his maid's daughter crying in the kitchen. The truth about her scars destroyed him. Chapter 1. The kitchen at midnight. Kitchen of Blackthorn Manor was never truly silent. Even at midnight, the old stones whispered, wind threading through gaps in the ancient mortar, mice scratching behind the pantry walls, the distant drip of water somewhere in the labyrinth of servant passages. Elena had learned to find comfort in these sounds during the 3 months since her mother had taken the housemaid position here, fleeing the scandal that had burned their former life to ash. Tonight, though, Elena couldn't hear anything past the roaring in her own ears. She sat on the cold flagstone floor, knees pulled to her chest, back pressed against the cupboard beneath the copper sink. Her hands trembled as she gripped the torn sleeve of her nightgown, exposing the patchwork of scars that climbed her left arm like poisoned ivy, some pale and faded, others still pink and angry. The fabric had caught on a nail in her sleep, ripping open, and she'd fled her narrow attic room before her mother could see, before anyone could see. The tears came hot and bitter, silent, out of long practice. She'd perfected the art of crying without sound years ago, back when making noise meant worse things than pity. Now, she pressed her forehead to her knees and let the grief come for her ruined arm. For the man who'd done this to her, for the life she'd lost, for the fear that still woke her, gasping in the dark. She didn't hear the door open. You should not be here. Elena's head snapped up, heart slamming against her ribs. For one terrible moment, she couldn't see him, only shadow and the faint gleam of eyes that reflected the dying embers in the kitchen hearth like a cat's. Then he stepped forward, and the world tilted. Lord Cassius Blackthorn, master of the manor, the man the other servants whispered about in daylight and refused to name after dark. He was tall, impossibly so, dressed in black that made his pale skin seem to glow. His hair fell dark and straight past his shoulders, framing a face too angular to be handsome, too ancient to be young. Elena had seen him only twice before, always at a distance, always at night, and both times she'd felt the same irrational urge to run. Now, trapped on the floor, with her scars exposed and tears wet on her face, she couldn't move at all. Cassius stopped 3 paces away. His eyes, dark gray, almost colorless in the dim light, moved from her face to her arm, then back again. His expression revealed nothing, not disgust, not pity, nothing. I'm sorry, my lord. Elena's voice came out hoarse. She scrambled to cover her arm, but the torn fabric wouldn't cooperate. I couldn't sleep. I didn't mean to intrude. This is my house. His voice was quiet, inflectionless. Every room is an intrusion. She flinched. Something flickered across his face there and gone too quickly to name. He moved again, slower this time, and crouched at a careful distance. Not close enough to touch. Not far enough to feel safe. Who did that to you? The question was so unexpected that Elena forgot to lie. My husband. Former husband, I assume. Dead husband. The words tasted like ash. 6 months ago. Cassius tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. In the firelight, she could see details she'd missed before: the inhuman stillness of his posture, the way his chest didn't move with breath, the faint tracery of silver scars along his throat that looked like they'd been made by claws. You're afraid of me, he said. Not a question. Yes, good. He stood in one fluid motion, too fast and too graceful to be human. Fear keeps mortals alive in houses like this one. Elena's breath caught. Mortals. The word hung in the air between them. Confirmation of every whispered rumor, every locked door, every servant who'd vanished without explanation. Yes. Cassius turned toward the door, dismissing her. Go back to your room. Lock your door. Do not wander these halls after dark again. She should have obeyed. Should have run. Instead, Elena heard herself ask, why are you being kind to me? He paused, one hand on the doorframe. When he looked back, his expression was carefully, perfectly blank, and somehow that emptiness was more frightening than rage would have been. I'm not kind, Cassius said softly. I simply have no taste for damaged things. The words hit like a slap. Elena felt her face burn, humiliation flooding through her chest. She watched him walk away, footsteps silent on stone, and disappear into the darkness of the corridor beyond. Only after he was gone did she realize 2 things. First, he'd called them mortals, plural, which meant she wasn't the only human in danger here. Second, when he'd looked at her scars, his hands had clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles had gone white, whiter than bone, whiter than death, and she'd heard something crack, like breaking glass. like splintering rage, like he'd wanted to destroy whoever had hurt her. Elena sat alone in the kitchen as the embers died, torn between terror and something far more dangerous. Because Lord Cassius Blackthorn had lied to her tonight. He'd lied about not being kind, and she suspected he'd lied about having no taste for damaged things. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the vast darkness of Blackthorn Manor, a clock struck 1. And Elena understood, with the cold certainty of instinct, that her quiet, wounded life had just shattered beyond repair. The vampire had seen her, really seen her, and nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 2. Blood on the doorstep. Elena didn't sleep. She lay in her narrow attic bed, listening to the manor settle around her, and tried to convince herself that the encounter in the kitchen had been a dream, a nightmare born of exhaustion and grief. But when dawn light finally crept through the gap in her curtains, the torn nightgown still lay on the floor, and her arms still bore its constellation of scars, and Lord Cassius Blackthorn was still a vampire. The thought should have sent her running. Instead, Elena, dressed with mechanical precision gray work dress, white apron, her mother's tarnished locket tucked beneath her collar, and descended the servants' stairs as she did every morning. The routine felt fragile now, like walking on ice that might crack at any moment. The kitchen was empty when she arrived. No sign of last night's encounter except the faint smell of cold ash from the hearth. Elena set about her morning task, stoking the fire, filling the kettle, laying out ingredients for breakfast, and tried not to think about eyes that reflected light like a predator's. Her mother appeared an hour later, face drawn with exhaustion. Margaret had worked at Blackthorn Manor for 3 months without ever meeting its master, a fact that had seemed like luck until now. "You look pale," her mother said, touching Elena's forehead. "Are you ill?" "I'm fine." The lie came easily. Elena had spent years hiding truths. "Just tired." Margaret studied her daughter with the keen perception of someone who'd learned to read silence. But before she could press further, rapid footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Mrs. Thornberry, the head housekeeper, burst through the door. Her face was chalk white, her usually perfect hair disheveled. In her trembling hands, she clutched a piece of parchment marked with a red seal. "Margaret." "Elena." The older woman's voice shook. "Pack your things. You're leaving. Today. Now." Elena's stomach dropped. "What? Why?" "There's been." Mrs. Thornberry glanced toward the door, lowering her voice to barely a whisper. "There's been a challenge. House Moreau has sent a formal declaration. They're claiming territorial rights to this region." She thrust the parchment toward them as if it burned her fingers. 3 servants have already fled. Lord Blackthorn says any who wish to leave should do so before nightfall. Margaret's face went gray. "We have nowhere to go." "Then pray." Mrs. Thornberry's eyes glistened with tears. "Because when House Moreau comes, they don't distinguish between master and staff. We're all just blood to them." She fled, leaving the parchment on the table. Elena picked it up with numb fingers. The seal was elaborate, a raven clutching a rose, and the words beneath were written in a script so old she could barely read them. But certain phrases stood out like wounds, blood, debt, ancient claim, surrender or face annihilation. "We have to leave." Margaret was already moving, untying her apron with shaking hands. "We'll go to the village. Find somewhere. With what money?" Elena's voice came out flat. "We spent everything getting here. And the scandal follows us. No one else will hire us." The truth settled between them like a tombstone. They'd fled to Blackthorn Manor because it was the only place desperate enough or strange enough to take a widow and her scarred daughter without asking questions. Now that refuge was crumbling, a door opened somewhere in the depths of the house. Footsteps approached, slow, measured, silent on stone. Lord Cassius appeared in the kitchen doorway. In daylight, he looked wrong. Not quite translucent, but faded somehow, like an old photograph. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he moved with a careful deliberation that suggested pain. His left hand was wrapped in black cloth that didn't quite hide the dark stains seeping through. Blood. Elena realized with a jolt. He was bleeding. "You're still here." Cassius's gaze moved from Margaret to Elena, lingering on her face. "I gave permission for all staff to leave. We have nowhere to go, my lord." Margaret's voice was steady despite her fear. "But we won't be a burden. We'll stay out of sight until House Moreau arrives." Cassius's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "They're coming tonight. And they're not coming for me." He looked directly at Elena. "They're coming for leverage." Elena's breath caught. "What?" House Moreau knows I've been weakened. He lifted his bandaged hand slightly. Silver blade. Enchanted. It's not healing as it should. They also know that I've always maintained certain standards regarding the mortals under my protection. His voice went cold. Standards they don't share. The implication hung in the air like poison. Margaret stepped forward, positioning herself between her daughter and the vampire. What are you saying? I'm saying that when they come, they'll slaughter every human in this house. Cassius spoke with terrible calm. Not for food, not out of necessity, but to prove that I'm too weak to defend what's mine. His eyes met Elena's again. You have two choices. Run and hope they don't hunt you for sport, or stay under my protection. Your protection didn't stop them from wounding you. Elena heard herself say. Something dangerous flickered in his expression. They ambushed me during the day. Tonight, I'll be at full strength. He paused. Or close to it. The uncertainty in those last words terrified her more than confidence would have. And what would this protection cost us? Margaret demanded. Cassius's gaze never left Elena's face. Proximity. You'll need to stay in the secure wing, near my chambers, where I can ensure your safety. He turned toward the door, then stopped. Decide quickly. Sunset is in 12 hours. After that, the choice is made for you. He walked away, leaving a faint trail of blood drops on the stone floor. Elena stared at those drops, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed to run. But she thought of the kitchen last night, of the rage she'd glimpsed in his clenched fists, of the lie about damaged things, of the way he'd studied her scars like they mattered. Elena, her mother's voice was thick with dread. We can't trust him, I know. Elena touched the locket at her throat, feeling the weight of impossible choices. But can we trust anyone else? Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with coming storm. And somewhere in Blackthorn Manor's shadowed halls, a wounded vampire prepared for war. Elena closed her eyes and made her choice. They would stay. Chapter 3. The secure wing of Blackthorn Manor occupied the oldest part of the house, a stone fortress built centuries before the more elegant additions. Elena and her mother carried their few possessions through corridors that grew progressively darker, colder, more ancient. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting shadows that moved like living things. Cassius led them in silence, his wounded hand now concealed beneath a black leather glove. He moved differently than he had in daylight, fluid and predatory, no trace of pain or hesitation. The setting sun had restored something to him, something that made Elena's instincts scream danger with every step. These rooms haven't been occupied in decades, he said, stopping before a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. But they're defensible. Stone walls 3 feet thick, windows barred with blessed silver. He pushed the door open. House Moreau cannot enter without invitation. As long as you stay within these boundaries, you're safe. The room beyond was surprisingly large sitting area, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchenette. Dusty, but furnished with pieces that must have been grand once. Velvet curtains, carved chairs, a mirror and a gilded frame. It felt like stepping into a tomb of vanished luxury. The adjoining room is mine. Cassius gestured to a door on the far wall. If there's trouble, knock 3 times. I'll hear you. Margaret set down her bag, her face carefully neutral. And if we need to leave these rooms, don't. The word was flat, absolute. Not after dark. Not until this is over. He turned to leave, but Elena found herself speaking. Your hand. Is it getting worse? Cassius paused, his back to her. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then, silver poison spreads slowly in my kind. It won't kill me, but it will weaken me when I can least afford weakness. Can't you feed to heal faster? The question felt dangerous, but Elena needed to understand what they were dealing with. He looked back, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Not anger, something raw. Hunger, maybe, or exhaustion so deep it had fostered roots. Feeding requires consent, Cassius said quietly. Freely given. Without coercion or fear. His gaze held hers. I've not fed properly in 3 weeks. I won't take from humans who have no real choice but to offer. The admission hung between them, part confession, part warning. That's why you're weak, Elena said. That's why House Moreau is striking now. Yes. He moved to the door, then stopped again. A word of advice, Miss Elena. Curiosity about my kind is dangerous. The more you understand, the harder it becomes to look away. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. And you should look away. Before it's too late. He left, the door closing with a soft click that somehow sounded like a cell locking, Margaret immediately began unpacking, her movements sharp with anxiety. We should have run. To where? Elena moved to the barred window. Beyond the glass, the grounds of Blackthorn Manor stretched toward dark forests. No lights anywhere, no neighboring houses. They were utterly isolated, anywhere but here. Her mother's voice cracked. Elena, he's a monster. Whatever kindness you think you see, he's starving himself rather than force someone to feed him. The words came out more defensive than Elena intended. That's not monstrous. It's not human either. Margaret caught her daughter's arm, turning her around. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't let your curiosity override your sense. Elena promised, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. That night, sleep proved impossible. Elena lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to sounds she'd never heard before, distant howls that might have been wolves, wind that sounded like whispers, the creak and groan of ancient stone settling. And beneath it all, something else, movement from the adjoining room. Footsteps, pacing back and forth with mechanical repetition, never stopping, never slowing. At midnight, Elena gave up on sleep and crept to the sitting room. Moonlight streamed through the barred windows, painting everything silver. She found herself drawn to the door that led to Cassius's chambers. Pressing her ear against the wood, the pacing continued, back and forth, then a sound that made her blood freeze, a sharp intake of breath, almost a gasp, followed by a string of words in a language so old it hurt to hear. He was in pain. Elena's hand moved to the doorknob before she could think better of it. 3 knocks, just as he'd instructed. The pacing stopped. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then, go back to bed. You're hurt. I'm always hurt, in one way or another. It's the nature of immortality. His voice was muffled by the door, but clear enough to catch the bitter edge. Now go, please. Elena knocked again. 3 times. A longer silence. Then the door opened. Cassius stood in the doorway, wearing only dark trousers and an unbuttoned shirt. In the moonlight, Elena could see what the formal clothes had hidden scars everywhere, crisscrossing his chest and arms like a map of violence. Some were pale and ancient, others looked fresh, still pink at the edges. The bandage on his left hand had been removed, revealing blackened veins spreading from a wound on his palm that wept dark blood. Satisfied? His voice was rough. Now you've seen what we really are. Scarred, poisoned, barely holding on to the shape of men. Elena stared at the veins crawling up his arm, then at her own scarred flesh. 2 damaged creatures standing in moonlight, both marked by different kinds of violence. I brought clean bandages, she lied. She hadn't, but she could get them. Let me help. No, why not? Because you smell like fear and kindness, and I'm not certain which is more dangerous to me right now. Cassius started to close the door. Go back to bed, Elena, while you still can. But Elena pressed her hand against the door, holding it open. You said curiosity was dangerous. You said I should look away. She met his eyes. I'm not looking away. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or recognition. He studied her for a long moment, and Elena wondered if he could hear her heart hammering against her ribs. Finally, Cassius stepped back, allowing her entry. You're a fool, he said softly. I've been called worse. The words hung between them as Elena crossed the threshold into the vampire's room, leaving safety behind. Outside, storm clouds gathered, and in the forest beyond the manor's walls, something howled. An answer. Chapter 4. Silver and Secret Cassius' chambers were sparse in a way that spoke of centuries rather than poverty. No paintings on the stone walls, no personal effects scattered about. Just a massive bed draped in black velvet, a desk covered in maps and papers, and shelves lined with books so old their spines had cracked to leather fragments. A prison, Elena thought. Not a home. Sit, she commanded, pointing to the chair by the desk. When Cassius raised an eyebrow, she added, please. To her surprise, he obeyed. He sat with the careful stillness of someone managing pain, cradling his wounded hand against his chest. Elena moved to the kitchenette in the sitting room, finding clean cloths and a basin. Her mother slept on, unaware. When she returned, Cassius watched her with an expression she couldn't read. I don't have medical supplies, she admitted, kneeling beside him. But my husband's anger taught me something about caring for wounds. His jaw tightened at the mention of her husband. But he said nothing. Elena took his hand gently, turning it palm up in the candlelight. The wound was worse than she'd thought, a deep puncture surrounded by blackened flesh. dark veins spreading like cracks in porcelain. The skin felt fever-hot beneath her fingers, though she suspected vampires shouldn't have warmth at all. Silver burns us from the inside, Cassius said quietly. It will work its way out eventually, but the process is unpleasant. How long? Days, maybe a week. He watched her face carefully. You should be more disgusted. I've seen worse. Elena dipped the cloth in water and began cleaning the dried blood from his palm. My husband broke my arm in 3 places once. Wouldn't let me see a doctor. Said I'd brought it on myself by speaking out of turn. She felt Cassius's hand tense beneath hers, but kept working. I said it myself in our bedroom, biting down on leather so he wouldn't hear me scream. The silence that followed was so absolute she could hear her own heartbeat. His name, Cassius finally said, his voice soft as death. Tell me his name. Elena looked up, startled by the intensity in his eyes. Why? He's dead. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Something in his tone made her shiver, not fear exactly, but recognition of something vast and terrible barely held in check. She thought of the rage she'd glimpsed in the kitchen, the way his hands had clenched at the sight of her scars. Thomas Hartley, she whispered. But he's been dead 6 months. There's nothing. How did he die? Elena's hands stilled on his wound. The constable said it was footpads. Robbers. They found him in an alley with his throat torn out. She met Cassius's eyes. But you already knew that, didn't you? His expression revealed nothing. I know many things. Did you kill him? Would it matter if I had? The question hung between them, terrible and honest. Elena thought about Thomas, his cruelty, his fists, the way he'd smiled while hurting her. She thought about the relief she'd felt at his funeral, the guilt that had followed, the complicated mess of emotions she still couldn't untangle. I don't know, she admitted. I should say yes. I should be horrified. But I'm not. Cassius studied her for a long moment, then gently extracted his hand from hers. He stood and moved to the window, staring out at the darkness beyond. I didn't kill your husband, he said finally. But I know who did. He turned back, and in the candlelight, he looked ancient and unbearably weary. House Moreau. They've been hunting in the surrounding villages for months, taking mortals under my protection to undermine my authority. Your husband was likely chosen at random. Wrong place, wrong time. The words hit like ice water. Elena had spent 6 months believing Thomas's death was somehow her fault, cosmic punishment for not mourning him properly, for feeling relief instead of grief. To learn it was simply random, simply bad luck. They kill humans for politics, she said flatly. Yes. Cassius moved back to his chair, sitting heavily. Welcome to the world of vampire houses. We're ancient, powerful, and petty as children fighting over toys. His voice dripped with self-loathing. Thomas Hartley died because House Moreau wanted to send me a message. You lost your life, your reputation, everything, collateral damage in a game you didn't know existed. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. All this time, she'd been carrying guilt for not grieving properly, for feeling grateful she'd survived. But she'd been a pawn in someone else's war from the beginning. I'm sorry. Cassius's voice was rough. I'm sorry you were touched by this world. I'm sorry I couldn't prevent it. And I'm sorry that my protection now puts you in even greater danger. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the predator to the man beneath, to the grief he carried, the responsibility, the crushing weight of centuries watching mortals suffer for immortal games. How old are you? Elena asked softly. 473 years. He flexed his wounded hand, wincing. Long enough to know that kindness is dangerous. Long enough to know better than to care. His eyes met hers. And yet here I am, starving myself, preparing for war, because I can't stomach the thought of House Moreau touching anyone under this roof. Why? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for so long that Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I remember being human. I remember what it felt like to be powerless, to watch people I love suffer, to beg for mercy that never came. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. And I swore that if I survived, if I gained power, I would never become the monster who destroyed my family. Elena saw it then, the grief beneath his cold control. The determination to be different, the exhaustion of fighting his own nature for centuries. He wasn't just protecting them out of duty or pride. He was trying to prove something to himself, even if it killed him. She reached out and took his wounded hand again, holding it gently. Then let me help you, Elena said. Not because I have to, because I choose to. Cassius stared at their joined hands, something raw and vulnerable crossing his face. You don't know what you're offering, then tell me. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was coming closer, and in Cassius's dark eyes, Elena saw the first crack in his armor, the beginning of trust. Chapter 5. The warning bell. Cassius told her about the feeding. Not all of it. Elena suspected he was editing carefully, protecting her from the worst details. But he explained enough. The necessity of consent. The intimacy of it. More profound than any physical act. The way a vampire could taste emotions and blood, read memories, forge connections that lasted lifetimes. It's why most of my kind prefer the unwilling, he said, staring at his wounded hand. Consent means vulnerability. It means the mortal has power over you, can refuse you, can see into you as deeply as you see into them. He looked up, meeting her eyes. It's terrifying. Is that why you won't ask? Elena's voice was quiet. Because you're afraid? I'm afraid of what I might take. His honesty was brutal. When you're starving, control becomes fragile, and you've already survived one man who took too much from you. I won't be the second. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the barred windows. The storm was close now. Elena could smell rain on the air, feel the pressure building like something alive, then cutting through the night. A bell began to ring. Cassius was on his feet instantly, his entire body going rigid. Get to your mother, now. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. What's happening? That's the village bell. His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. 3 tolls means attack. House Moreau isn't waiting for me. They're starting with the humans. Elena's blood turned to ice. The village? But there are families there. Children, I know. Cassius was already moving, pulling on his coat with swift, precise movements. Stay here. Protect your mother. I'll stop them if I can. He headed for the door, but Elena caught his arm. You're wounded, weakened. If you go out there alone, then I die protecting mortals who will never know my name. He gently removed her hand from his sleeve. It's what I swore I would do. 4 centuries ago, when I still believed oaths mattered. Cassius, he turned back, and the look in his eyes stopped her breath. Not resignation, not even fear. Just a terrible, bone-deep weariness mixed with something fiercer. Purpose, maybe. Or redemption. If I don't return by dawn, he said quietly, take your mother and run. Go to the city. Find a church. They'll give you sanctuary. He pressed something into her hand, a heavy iron key. This opens the eastern gate. It's hidden by ivy, impossible to see unless you know where to look. Elena stared at the key, then at him. You're planning to die tonight. I'm planning to fight. His mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Death is just a possibility I've learned to accept. The bell tolled again 4 times now. Screams drifted on the wind, faint but unmistakable. Cassius moved to the window, and Elena saw his reflection in the glass predator emerging from the careful mask of civilization. When he turned back, his eyes had changed, gone darker, more feral. The monster showing through. Whatever you hear tonight, he said, whatever screams, whatever sounds of violence, stay inside. House Moreau will use your compassion against you. They'll mimic voices, fake injuries, anything to draw you out. His voice went deadly soft. Trust nothing after dark. Not even me. If I return before dawn. Then he was gone, moving with inhuman speed through the doorway and into the shadows beyond. Elena stood frozen for 3 heartbeats. Then she ran to her mother's room, shaking the older woman awake. What's happening? Margaret sat up, disoriented. Is it morning? House Moreau is attacking the village. Cassius has gone to fight them. Elena pulled her mother toward the sitting room. We have to lock the doors, bar the windows. He said. A crash echoed from somewhere in the manor, glass shattering, wood splintering. Then laughter, high and cruel and definitely not human. They're inside, Margaret whispered. Elena's mind raced. The secure wing was protected, Cassius had said. Warded, but the rest of the manor, the other servants, more screams. Closer now. A woman's voice, raw with terror, cut off abruptly. Margaret grabbed Elena's arms. We have to hide. The bedroom, under the bed. We know. Elena moved to the heavy oak door, checking the iron bands, the blessed silver inlaid in the frame. Cassius said this room is safe. We stay here. We wait. And if he doesn't come back? Elena clutched the iron key in her fist. Then we run at dawn. They huddled together in the sitting room as chaos erupted through Blackthorn Manor. Footsteps pounded overhead. More glass shattered. Voices called out in that same ancient language Cassius had used, words that hurt to hear. And beneath it all, a sound like wet tearing that made Elena's stomach turn. Feeding. House Moreau was feeding on the staff. Why isn't he stopping them? Margaret's voice shook. He said he would protect. He's one vampire against an entire house. Elena stared at the door to Cassius's chambers, willing him to return safely. And he's wounded, weakened. They chose tonight because they knew he couldn't win. A scream echoed from the corridor outside their door. Mrs. Thornberry's voice, Elena realized with horror. The housekeeper who'd warned them to flee. The sound cut off mid-breath, leaving only terrible silence. Then something knocked on their door. 3 soft taps. Margaret gasped. Elena put a hand over her mother's mouth, shaking her head frantically. Cassius had warned them. Trust nothing. Not even him. The knocking came again. Elena? The voice was perfect. Cassius's voice, his inflection, his accent. Open the door. I'm wounded. I need help. Every instinct screamed at her to obey. But she remembered his words. Not even me. If I return before dawn. Elena, please. The voice cracked with pain. They're coming. I can't hold them off much longer. Let me in. Margaret looked at her daughter, tears streaming down her face. We have to help him. That's not him. Elena kept her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. He told us. He warned us. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched for 5 heartbeats, then laughter, cold, vicious, delighted. Clever little mortal. The voice that had mimicked Cassius shifted, became female, honey sweet and poisonous. He's taught you well. Pity it won't save you when we burn through these wards. Footsteps retreated down the corridor. Elena and her mother stood in the darkness, holding each other, while Blackthorn Manor tore itself apart around them, and somewhere in the chaos, Cassius fought alone. Chapter 6. Blood and Ashes. The chaos lasted 3 hours. Elena and Margaret huddled in the sitting room, listening to the symphony of violence beyond their door. Screams that cut off too quickly. The wet sound of feeding. Furniture overturning. And beneath it all, something else, the clash of metal, snarls of rage, the unmistakable sound of combat. Cassius was fighting, still fighting, but the sounds were growing fainter, more distant. He was being driven back, overwhelmed by numbers and his own weakness. He's losing, Margaret whispered. Elena pressed her forehead against her knees, gripping the iron key so hard it cut into her palm. Every instinct screamed at her to help, to do something. But what could she do? She was human, mortal, fragile as paper against creatures who'd lived centuries. Then, cutting through the chaos, a voice rang out, male, cultured, authority woven into every syllable. Cassius Blackthorn, yield. The fighting stopped. In the sudden silence, Elena could hear her own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. I don't yield to cowards who slaughter servants. Cassius's voice was raw, exhausted, but still defiant. Especially not to House Moreau. Laughter rippled through the manor, multiple voices, male and female, all tinged with cruelty. Cowards. The first voice sounded amused. We're simply practical. Your staff provided excellent refreshment after the journey, though a few escaped to the village. We'll collect them later. Touch them and I'll end you, Dominic. With what strength? Footsteps approached, slow, measured, confident. You can barely stand. The silver's spreading nicely, I see. Who wounded you? Was it my sister? She always did have a talent for ambushes. Silence. Then the sound of something heavy hitting stone. Margaret flinched. Elena's nails dug crescents into her palms. Your precious code makes you weak, Dominic continued. Consent, protection, ancient laws written by fools who forgot what we are. His voice hardened. We're apex predators. The humans are cattle. The sooner you remember that, the easier this becomes. I remember what we are. Cassius's words came through gritted teeth. That's why I chose differently. And look where it's brought you. Starving, wounded, alone. A pause. Where are the 2 women, Cassius? The widow and her daughter? I can smell them. Fresh blood, fear sweetened. They're here somewhere. Elena's breath stopped. Dead, Cassius said flatly. Fled during the chaos. Fell to your sister in the east corridor. Liar. Dominic's voice sharpened. Your heartbeat stutters when you lie. It always has. They're alive, hidden, under your protection. Footsteps moved closer. Which room, I wonder? The secure wing. How sentimental. That's where you kept your human family, wasn't it? Before we burned them? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 400 years ago, Cassius whispered, and Elena heard something break in his voice. 400 years, and you still use that against me. Because it still works. Dominic's laugh was poison. You never stopped grieving them. Never stopped trying to replace what you lost. It's pathetic, really. These mortals mean nothing. They'll die in a blink. Why do you keep trying to save them? Because someone has to. The words hung in the air, simple and absolute. Elena felt tears burn her eyes. She understood now. Cassius wasn't protecting them out of duty or pride. He was protecting them because 4 centuries ago, no one had protected his family. Because he'd been helpless once, human once, and the memory of that helplessness still drove him. He was trying to save the people he couldn't save then. Your choice, Dominic said. Surrender the territory to House Moreau. Swear fealty. We'll spare the mortals. They'll become house property, of course, but alive is alive. A pause. Or refuse, and we'll tear through those wards, drain your precious widow and daughter in front of you, and leave you alive to remember. Elena's hand moved to the door handle before she could think. Margaret grabbed her arm, shaking her head frantically. But Elena gently removed her mother's grip. What are you doing? Margaret hissed. He's dying for us, Elena whispered. And I'm not going to let that happen. You can't fight them. You're human. I know. Elena turned the handle slowly, carefully, making no sound. That's exactly why this might work. Before her mother could stop her, Elena slipped through the door into the corridor. The hallway was a massacre. Blood painted the walls in dark streaks. Bodies, servants she'd known, people who'd smiled at her in passing lay crumpled like discarded dolls. Elena swallowed bile and forced herself to keep moving. She could hear voices ahead. The Great Hall, probably. That's where they'd cornered him. Elena's mind raced. She had no weapons, no plan, just the iron key in her pocket and a desperate, probably suicidal idea forming in her head. She'd learned something about vampires tonight. They were arrogant, confident. They saw humans as prey, nothing more, which meant they wouldn't expect resistance from a mortal woman. Elena reached the Great Hall and pressed herself against the wall. Peering around the doorframe, Cassius knelt in the center of the room, surrounded by 5 vampires. His coat was torn, his face bloodied. The wound on his hand had torn open, black veins spreading up his arm past the elbow. Now, he could barely hold himself upright. Dominic Moreau stood before him, tall, golden-haired, beautiful as a fallen angel. He held a silver dagger, its blade stained dark. Last chance, Dominic said. Yield or watch them die. Cassius lifted his head, and even wounded, even beaten, his expression held nothing but defiance. I don't yield, Dominic smiled. So be it. Find the women. Bring them here. 2 vampires moved toward the corridor toward Elena. She took a deep breath, stepped into the doorway. Looking for me? Every head turned. Cassius's eyes went wide with horror. Elena walked forward on shaking legs, forcing herself to meet Dominic's gaze. I'm Elena Hartley, the one you want. Let Lord Blackthorn go. Take me instead. Dominic's smile widened, showing fangs. How noble. How stupid. He gestured, and a female vampire grabbed Elena, hauling her into the center of the room. Did you really think you could bargain for his life, little mortal? No, Elena said quietly. I came to offer you something better than territory. She pulled the iron key from her pocket and held it up. I know where Cassius keeps his true treasure. 4 centuries of accumulated wealth, gold, artifacts, blood reserves from ancient lines. The lies came smoothly, desperately. Let us both live, and I'll show you where. Dominic studied her, intrigued. And why would you betray your protector? Elena met Cassius's eyes, saw the understanding there, the desperate hope. Because I want to survive, she said. And I'm a much better liar than he is. Chapter 7. Fire and faith. Dominic circled Elena like a predator assessing prey, his golden eyes glinting with amusement and suspicion. You're either remarkably clever or spectacularly foolish. I haven't decided which. Does it matter? Elena kept her voice steady despite her thundering heart. You want wealth, power. I can give you access to both. All I ask is my life and my mother's freedom. And his. Dominic gestured toward Cassius, who remained on his knees, watching Elena with an expression caught between horror and desperate calculation. I don't care what happens to him. The lie tasted like ash. Elena forced herself to look away from Cassius, to meet Dominic's gaze with feigned indifference. He's kept us prisoner here, used us as leverage. I'm simply choosing the winning side. One of the female vampires laughed, a crystalline sound sharp as breaking glass. She's lying. I can smell the fear on her. She reeks of it. Of course she's afraid, Dominic said softly. She's surrounded by predators. But fear doesn't mean she's lying. He moved closer to Elena, close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from his skin. Tell me, Elena Hartley, this treasure, where is it? Elena's mind raced. She needed to buy time, get them away from Cassius, create an opening. The catacombs beneath the manor. There's a sealed vault. I've seen Cassius go down there at night. He thinks no one knows. It was a gamble. She had no idea if there even were catacombs. But every Gothic manor had crypts, didn't it? Underground passages? It was plausible enough. Dominic studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to Cassius. Is she telling the truth? Cassius's jaw tightened. Elena could see him weighing options, calculating odds. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. The catacombs are sealed by blood wards. Only my line can open them. Convenient, Dominic said. But there was interest in his tone now. Greed. Then you'll open them. And your little mortal will show us where. No, Cassius tried to rise, but two vampires forced him down. The wards will collapse if breached. Everything inside will be destroyed. You'll get nothing. Then we'll simply have to be careful. Dominic gestured to his companions. Bring them both. And fetch the mother from the secure wing. Insurance, in case our brave little traitor is playing games. Elena's stomach dropped. She'd hoped to draw them away, to give her mother time to escape. But Dominic was too clever, too cautious. The female vampire who'd grabbed Elena earlier now hauled her forward, claws digging into her arm hard enough to draw blood. Cassius was forced to his feet, supported between two others who handled him with casual brutality. They moved through the manor's corridors, past more bodies, more blood. Elena tried not to look, tried not to think about the people who'd died tonight. Mrs. Thornberry, the young maid Sarah, the groundskeeper who'd always tipped his hat to her mother, all dead because of vampire politics. Because House Murrow wanted power and Cassius refused to yield. They reached a stairwell Elena had never seen before, ancient stone steps descending into darkness. The air rising from below was cold and damp, heavy with the smell of earth and something else. Something old. After you, Dominic said, shoving Elena forward. She descended carefully, aware of Cassius behind her, his ragged breathing the only sound that proved he still lived. The steps seemed to go on forever, spiraling down into the manor's foundations. Torches flickered to life as they passed, reacting to vampire presence, casting dancing shadows on walls carved with symbols Elena didn't recognize. Finally, they reached the bottom. A massive chamber opened before them, its ceiling lost in darkness. And there, set into the far wall, was a door, black iron, covered in silver inlay that formed intricate patterns. Sealed. Well, Dominic breathed. Perhaps the little liar spoke true after all. He pushed Cassius forward. Open it. Cassius stumbled, nearly fell. When he looked up, his eyes found Elena's. In that moment, she saw everything he couldn't say aloud. The apology, the admiration, the desperate hope that she had some plan beyond pure sacrifice. She didn't, but she couldn't let him know that. Cassius moved to the door, placed his good hand against the iron. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the silver inlay began to glow, soft at first, then brighter. The patterns shifted, rearranged themselves, formed words in that same ancient language. The door swung open with a groan of metal. Beyond lay another chamber, smaller, and completely empty except for a single stone altar in the center. Dominic's expression darkened. Where is it? Where's the treasure? I didn't lie, Elena said quickly. I saw him come down here. I thought you thought wrong. The female vampire grabbed Elena's hair, yanking her head back to expose her throat. Shall I show her what happens to mortals who waste our time? Wait. Cassius's voice cut through the tension. There is something here, but it's not treasure. He moved to the altar, his movements slow and pained. It's something more valuable, more dangerous. He pressed his wounded hand against the stone. Blood black with silver poison dripped onto the altar's surface. The stone began to glow, and beneath their feet, Elena felt something shift. Power, vast and terrible, stirring from sleep. What have you done? Dominic's voice was sharp with sudden fear. Cassius turned, and his smile was terrible. 400 years ago, when House Moreau burned my family, I swore an oath. I bound myself to this place. Blood to stone, life to land. His voice grew stronger, resonant, as the power built. I vowed that if I ever faced my family's killers again, I would take them with me. The chamber began to shake. Cracks spider-webbed across the ceiling. You're mad, Dominic breathed. You'll bring the entire manor down on us. Yes. Cassius met Elena's eyes one last time. Run, now, save your mother. The Eastern Gate, remember. Elena understood. This was his endgame, his final play. He was going to collapse the catacombs, bury House Moreau in rubble and ancient stone. Even if it killed him too. No, she whispered. Run. Cassius roared, and his voice wasn't human anymore. It was the voice of something ancient and furious and done with mercy. The ceiling began to crumble. Vampires scattered, moving with inhuman speed toward the stairs. But Cassius remained at the altar, his blood feeding the terrible power he'd awakened. Elena ran, not away toward him. Through falling stone and rising dust, she ran to Cassius and grabbed his face in both hands. Not alone, she said. You don't die alone. Not this time. His eyes widened. Elena, you have to. She kissed him. Hard and desperate and human, her warm lips against his cold ones, her heartbeat thundering against his silent chest, and in that moment, something shifted. The power stuttered, changed, because Elena's blood, living and warm, touched his wounds where his poisoned blood had activated the ward. And the ancient magic, bound to protect Cassius's family, recognized something it hadn't felt in for centuries, a willing human, offering freely, choosing him. The collapse stopped. Chapter 8. The blood oath power that had threatened to tear the catacombs apart, now hung suspended, waiting. The ancient magic thrummed through the chamber like a living heartbeat, and Elena felt it resonate in her bones, in her blood. In the place where her lips still pressed against Cassius's, he pulled back first, his eyes wide with shock. What did you do? I don't know, Elena whispered. But she could feel it. Something had changed. The magic recognized her, welcomed her, as if she'd just spoken a password she hadn't known existed. Dominic recovered first, his fear transmuting back into rage. Touching, but ultimately pointless. He gestured to his vampires. Kill them both. We'll find another territory. But when his companions moved forward, they stopped at the threshold of the inner chamber. Stopped as if they'd hit an invisible wall. What is this? The female vampire pressed her hand against empty air and hissed as if burned. Blood ward. Fresh. But that's impossible. He's too weak to craft new wards. Cassius stared at Elena, then at the altar where their blood had mingled, his black and poisoned, hers red and living. Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by something that looked like wonder. It's not mine, he said quietly. It's hers. The ward recognized her as family, as protected. He turned to Dominic, and despite his wounds, despite his exhaustion, his smile was sharp as a blade. She's claimed sanctuary. Ancient, right? Even you can't break that, Dominic. Not without bringing the entire vampire council down on House Moreau. Dominic's face twisted with fury. She's nothing. Immortal. She has no claim. She has my claim. Cassius moved to stand beside Elena, and though he swayed with exhaustion, his voice was steady. By blood freely given. By choice freely made. The old laws are clear. The old laws are dead. Are they? Cassius gestured to the ward that held House Moreau at bay. Tell that to the magic that just saved her life. For a long moment, Dominic stared at them both. Elena could see him calculating, weighing options. Finally, he stepped back. This isn't over, he said softly. The territory dispute stands. Your protection is weakening. And when it fails, and it will fail, we'll be waiting. His golden eyes fixed on Elena. Especially for you, little mortal. You've made yourself very interesting tonight. Then he turned and swept from the chamber, his vampires following. Their footsteps echoed up the stone stairway and faded into silence. Elena's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if Cassius hadn't caught her, his wounded arm wrapping around her waist. Despite the obvious pain it cost him, foolish, he muttered, but his voice was gentle. Brave and foolish, and he stopped, seeming to struggle for words. Why didn't you run? Because you were dying. Elena looked up at him, seeing the black veins spreading across his chest now, the fever-bright sheen to his skin. And I couldn't let that happen. I'm not worth saving. That's not your choice to make. Cassius stared at her for a long moment. Then carefully, he released her and moved to sit on the altar steps. His strength was clearly failing the confrontation, and the blood magic had drained what little reserves he'd had left. Your mother, he said. She's still in the secure wing. You need to, she's safe for now. You're not. Elena knelt beside him, examining the wound on his hand. The black veins had spread past his elbow, creeping toward his shoulder. How do we stop the silver poison? We don't. It works its way out, or it kills me. He managed a weak smile. Given my current state, I'd say we're looking at option 2. No, Elena's voice was fierce. You don't get to give up. Not after everything. There has to be a way to heal you. Cassius was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. There is, but you won't like it. Tell me. Fresh blood. Freely given. Enough to flush the poison from my system. He looked away. But taking that much would require intimacy, connection, the full feeding bond. And I told you I won't take from someone who feels coerced, who has no real choice. Elena thought of her mother, safe behind wards, of the servants who'd died tonight, of Thomas and the scars he'd left, the terror he'd carved into her soul. She thought of Cassius kneeling in the great hall, choosing death over surrender, choosing honor over survival, and she thought of the way he'd looked at her scars that first night with rage for the man who'd hurt her, not disgust at her damage. What if I choose freely? She asked quietly. His head snapped toward her. Elena, what if I understand exactly what I'm offering, and I choose it anyway? She met his eyes. You've been starving yourself for weeks. You're dying from silver poison, and you're about to face more attacks from House Moreau. She took his wounded hand in both of hers. Let me help you. Not because I'm coerced, not because I'm grateful, but because I choose to. You don't know what you're offering. His voice was strained. The feeding bond, it's intimate. You'll feel everything I feel. I'll taste your memories, your emotions. There will be no secrets between us. And once formed, the bond doesn't break easily. I know. Elena had learned enough tonight to understand. I'm still offering. Cassius closed his eyes, and she saw him shaking with hunger, with restraint, with the effort of holding himself back. Why? Why would you do this? Because someone has to, she said, echoing his own words back to him. Because you've spent 400 years protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Because you remembered being human, being helpless, and you chose to be different. She squeezed his hand gently. And because when you saw my scars, you didn't see damage. You saw survival. Worth saving. When he opened his eyes again, they were darker, more feral. The predator, rising as his control slipped. If we do this, there's no going back. You'll be bound to me, to this world, to all its dangers. I'm already in danger. Elena touched the side of his face, feeling the fever heat of silver poison. At least this way, we face it together. For a long moment, Cassius simply looked at her. Then slowly, he lifted his good hand to cover hers. Are you certain? Yes. Say it clearly. Say you consent freely, without coercion, knowing what it means. Elena took a breath. I, Elena Hartley, consent freely to the feeding bond. I offer my blood willingly, understanding what it means, choosing this path of my own will. The words hung in the air like an incantation. Like an oath, Cassius's pupils dilated, and his fangs emerged longer than she'd expected, sharp as daggers. His hand tightened on hers, trembling with barely contained hunger. Last chance, he whispered. After this, everything changes. Good, Elena said. I'm tired of being afraid. She tilted her head, exposing her throat, and offered herself to the vampire who'd chosen honor over ease, protection over power, who'd seen her scars and called her brave. Cassius pulled her close, his cold body against her warm one, and bent to her throat. She felt his breath against her skin, felt the razor edge of fangs pressing gently, testing. Then he bit down, and Elena's world exploded into sensation. Chapter 9. The bond pain flared bright and sharp as his fangs pierced her skin, then dissolved into something else entirely. Warmth, connection, a rushing sensation like falling and flying. Simultaneously, Elena gasped as Cassius's emotions flooded through her. The desperate hunger of weeks without feeding, yes, but beneath it, something far more complex. Guilt, fear, wonder, and a loneliness so vast and ancient it made her want to weep. 400 years alone, she understood suddenly. 400 years protecting mortals he could never truly know, never truly touch. Because intimacy meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant loss, his arms tightened around her, holding her steady as he fed. She could feel the silver poison burning through his veins, feel it beginning to break apart as fresh blood flooded his system. But she could also feel something else, the way he tasted her memories as he drank, seeing flashes of her life like fragments of a dream. Thomas's fists, her mother's tears, the day they'd fled to Blackthorn Manor with nothing but shame and desperation, and deeper, the quiet strength she'd built from broken pieces, the determination to survive, the fierce protectiveness toward her mother, the scars she'd learned to carry with something almost like pride. Because they proved she'd endured, Cassius made a sound against her throat, not hunger, but recognition, understanding. You're not damaged, his thoughts whispered through the bond. You're a survivor, like me. Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks, because through the connection, she saw his memories too. Saw a young man barely 20, dark-haired and desperate, watching his family burn. House Moreau's attack, centuries ago. His parents, his sister, his wife and infant son, all consumed by flames while he'd been held captive, forced to watch, unable to save them. The vampire who'd turned him had done it out of cruelty, not mercy. Had made Cassius immortal just so he could spend eternity remembering what he'd lost. But instead of becoming a monster, Cassius had chosen to protect, to shield mortals from the horrors he'd experienced, to prove that vampires could be different, could be better, even if it meant centuries of isolation. I'm so tired, his thoughts whispered. So tired of watching mortals die, tired of failing to save them, tired of being alone. You're not alone anymore, Elena thought back, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. But he must have, because his grip on her gentled, became almost reverent. The feeding slowed, became less desperate and more careful. She could feel him monitoring her pulse, her strength, making sure he didn't take too much, and she could feel the poison breaking apart, the black veins receding as healthy blood surged through his body. The wound on his palm began to close, silver lace flesh knitting together, his strength returning. Finally, Cassius pulled back, his fangs withdrawing with surprising gentleness. He pressed his lips to the puncture wounds, and Elena felt a strange tingling vampire saliva sealing the bite, healing it, leaving barely a mark. They stayed locked together for a long moment, both breathing hard despite the fact that he didn't need to breathe. The bond still hummed between them, not as overwhelming now, but present, constant, like a thread connecting their souls. Elena, his voice was rough with emotion. I'm sorry. I never meant to. Don't. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes, which had returned to their normal gray. Don't apologize for letting me help. For letting me in. Cassius touched her face with trembling fingers, his wounded hand, now healed, no trace of black veins remaining. You saw everything. My family, my failure, the guilt I've carried for centuries. Yes, Elena covered his hand with hers. And you saw mine, Thomas, the scars, the shame. She managed a weak smile. We're quite a pair of damaged creatures, aren't we? Something shifted in his expression, grief transforming into something softer, almost hopeful. You're not damaged. Neither of us is. We're just, he paused, searching for words, surviving in the only way we know how. Elena nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. The bond had shown her something crucial. Shame and survival weren't the same thing. Carrying scars didn't make her broken. It made her strong. And Cassius, despite his guilt and loneliness, wasn't a monster. He was just a man who'd been forced to become something else, and had chosen to retain his humanity anyway. Your mother? Cassius said suddenly. She's terrified. I can feel it through the bond. You worry for her. Can you? Elena hesitated. Can you feel everything I feel now? Not everything. The bond fades with distance and time. But emotions, especially strong ones, will echo between us. He stood carefully, testing his strength. The transformation was remarkable. Where moments ago he'd barely been able to stand, now he moved with fluid grace. We need to get her. Reassure her you're safe. They made their way back up the stone stairs, and Elena was acutely aware of the new connection between them. She could sense Cassius's presence like a warmth in her chest, could feel echoes of his relief at being healed, his lingering concern for her well-being, and underneath it all, something else. Something that made her pulse quicken, desire, carefully controlled, firmly suppressed, but undeniably present. He wanted her, not just her blood, but her The woman who'd seen his worst memories and hadn't run, who'd offered herself freely when he'd expected fear. Elena felt her cheeks heat, wondering if he could sense her responding awareness through the bond, from the slight smile that tugged at his lips. She suspected he could. They found Margaret in the sitting room, barricaded behind overturned furniture, clutching a fire poker like a weapon. When she saw Elena, she dropped the poker and ran forward, pulling her daughter into a crushing embrace. Thank God, I heard the fighting. The collapse. I thought. Margaret pulled back, examining Elena with frantic hands. Then her eyes fell on the faint marks on Elena's throat. He fed from you. It wasn't a question. Margaret's face went pale with horror. Mother, it's not. He forced you. While I was locked away. He know. Elena caught her mother's hands firmly. I offered, freely. He was dying from silver poison. I chose to save him. Margaret looked from Elena to Cassius, who stood in the doorway, maintaining a careful distance. You chose this? This bond? Yes. Do you have any idea what you've done? Margaret's voice cracked. You've tied yourself to his world, to the danger, the politics, the violence. Tears streamed down her face. Elena, I've already lost so much. I can't lose you too. Elena felt Cassius's impulse through the bond, his desire to leave, to give them privacy, to remove the source of Margaret's fear. But she sent a pulse of reassurance his way, and turned back to her mother. You're not losing me, she said gently. I'm still here, still human, still your daughter. She touched the marks on her throat. But I'm also something more now. Someone who chose to trust, to help, to stop running from everything that scares me. Margaret was silent for a long moment, studying her daughter's face. Then slowly, she looked at Cassius. Can you protect her? Truly, protect her, from House Moreau and whatever comes next. With my life, Cassius said quietly. With everything I am. Then I suppose we stay. Margaret's voice was heavy with resignation. But when she looked at Elena again, there was something else in her eyes. Not approval exactly, but understanding. Though I reserve the right to be terrified, Elena managed a shaky laugh. That seems fair. Through the bond, she felt Cassius's profound relief and gratitude, but she also felt something darker stirring at the edge of his awareness. A warning, a certainty. House Moreau would return, stronger, more prepared, and the bond that had just saved them might also have painted an even larger target on Elena's back. Chapter 10. Dawn's promise. 3 days passed in strange, fragile peace. Cassius used the time to fortify the manor's defenses, strengthening wards, calling in debts from neutral vampire houses, sending messages through channels Elena didn't fully understand. The bond hummed constantly between them, and she'd learned to read his moods through it, determination tinged with worry, hope shadowed by centuries of learned caution. Margaret remained wary but civil, watching Cassius with the vigilance of a mother who'd already lost too much. She asked questions about vampire law, about the bond, about what future Elena had chosen by tying herself to his world. Some answers reassured her, others did not. On the 4th night, Elena stood at the barred window of the secure wing, watching moonlight silver the grounds. Behind her, she heard Cassius enter, his footsteps now familiar, the pulse of his presence through the bond as natural as breathing. You should be sleeping, he said quietly. So should you. Elena turned, managing a small smile. Oh, wait, you don't sleep. I rest. He moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Though lately, even that has been difficult. Through the bond, Elena felt his unease. House Moreau? Among other things. Cassius was silent for a moment. The Vampire Council has sent word. They've acknowledged the feeding bond, which grants you certain protections under old law. But they've also ruled that House Moreau's territorial challenge stands. His jaw tightened. There will be a formal contest in 1 month. If I win, the territory remains mine and you're safe. If I lose, he didn't need to finish. Elena understood. If he lost, House Moreau would claim Blackthorn Manor and everyone in it. Then we make sure you win, she said firmly. You say that as if it's simple, but she felt his gratitude through the bond. His wonder that she still stood beside him despite the danger. Nothing about this is simple. Elena turned to face him fully. But I didn't survive, Thomas, just to be destroyed by vampires with delusions of grandeur. She saw his lips twitch with almost amusement. What do you need? To prepare? To be strong enough to fight? Time. Training. He hesitated. And I need to know that you and your mother are safe, regardless of the outcome. If I fall, you won't, Elena." His voice was gentle but firm. "I've lived 400 years by planning for worst outcomes. If I fall, you need to run. The Eastern Gate key, remember? Take your mother to the city. Find sanctuary." No, the word came out fierce. "We don't plan your death. We plan your victory." Through the bond, she felt his emotions shift: surprise, admiration, and beneath it all, something deeper. Something that made her heart race. Love. Tentative and terrified, but undeniably there. Not born from the bond itself, but growing through their shared experiences, their honesty, their scars. "You're remarkable," Cassius said softly. "Do you know that? You face down monsters, offer your blood to save them, and then refuse to let them plan their own funerals." His hand lifted as if to touch her face, then fell. "I don't deserve you." "Stop that." Elena closed the distance between them, taking his hand in hers. "Stop acting like you're not worth saving. Like you're not worth fighting for." She pressed his palm to her chest, over her heart. "I chose this bond. I chose you. Not because I was coerced or desperate or stupid, but because I saw who you really are. A monster trying to pretend he's still human. A man trying to be better than the world expects." Elena held his gaze. "That's not monstrous. That's brave." For a long moment, Cassius simply stared at her. Then slowly, carefully, he cupped her face in both hands. "If I kiss you now, it won't be because of the bond. It won't be vampire magic or blood connection. It will be because I've spent 400 years alone, and you make me remember what it felt like to hope." "Then kiss me," Elena whispered. He did. It was nothing like the desperate kiss in the catacombs. This was slow, deliberate, achingly tender. His lips were cool against hers, but she felt the warmth of emotion pouring through the bond, centuries of loneliness cracking open. Letting her in, she kissed him back, pouring her own feelings into it, the trust he'd earned, the safety she'd found in his protection, the future she wanted to build despite the danger. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cassius rested his forehead against hers. "I will fight for you," he said quietly. "For your mother. For the life you deserve. I'll face House Moreau and the entire Vampire Council if necessary." "But Elena," he pulled back to meet her eyes. "You need to understand something. The bond goes both ways. If I die, you'll feel it. You'll feel me die." The words hit like ice water. "I know. And you still won't run?" "No." Elena touched the faded marks on her throat. "We survive together. Or not at all." His expression broke: grief and love and desperate hope all tangled together. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish. Can I be both?" Despite everything, he laughed. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost human. Elena realized she'd never heard him laugh before. Through the bond, she felt his resolve crystallize. He would fight, not just for territory or pride, but for her. For the future she'd made him believe was possible. "1 month, Cassius said. "I'll use it to prepare, to train, to ensure that when House Moreau comes, I'm ready." His hands tightened on hers. "And when I win, because I will win, we'll figure out what comes next. Together." Elena agreed. She felt it then, through the bond, a glimpse of the future he was letting himself imagine. Not just survival, but actual life. Elena growing older while he remained unchanged. Yes, but that didn't have to mean tragedy. It could mean partnership, companionship. A vampire lord and his mortal bonded, facing the centuries together. Until she chose mortality's end or transformation's gift, the choice would always be hers. That's what the bond meant: not possession, but partnership. Outside, the eastern sky began to lighten with approaching dawn. Cassius moved to the window, watching the darkness recede. "I used to hate the sunrise," he said quietly. "It meant retreating, hiding, weakness." He looked back at Elena. "But now, when I see dawn coming, I think of you. Of morning light and human warmth and second chances." His smile was soft. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost centuries ago." "What's that?" "Reasons to greet the sunrise." Elena moved to stand beside him, and together they watched the dawn break over Blackthorn Manor. Light spilled across the grounds, burning away shadows, illuminating the damage from House Moreau's attack. There would be repairs needed, bodies to bury, servants to mourn, but there would also be rebuilding, preparation, hope. Through the bond, Elena felt Cassius's determination settle like steel. House Moreau would return. The contest would come. Danger still lurked in every shadow, but for the first time in 400 years, Cassius Blackthorn wasn't facing it alone, and for the first time since Thomas's fists had taught her to fear, Elena Hartley wasn't running. She was standing her ground, choosing her future, building something from the ruins of her past. The sun rose higher, and Cassius had to retreat from the window, back into shadows. But before he left, he took Elena's hand one last time. 1 month, he promised. And then we fight for our future, Elena echoed, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. Whatever came next, vampire politics, ancient wars, impossible choices, they would face it together. Two damaged souls who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light. The bond pulls between them, steady as a heartbeat, and in that moment, standing between night and day, mortal and immortal, Elena knew with absolute certainty she had finally found home, not in a place, but in a person who saw her scars and called them beautiful, who'd given her choice when the world had only ever demanded submission, who'd taught her that survival wasn't the same as living and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stop running and fight for what you loved. Dawn broke fully over Blackthorn Manor, and Elena smiled, ready for whatever darkness the night would bring.